good morning. Not a morning person, so I'm glad to be with you all. So in the context of what we were asked to talk about in terms of employment, equity, and education, what we heard yesterday and what we've heard this morning just demonstrates what we all know, that lead, like so many other environmental injustices, is a tale of intersectionality. Intersectional root causes lead to exposures which result in intersectional impact and require intersectional solutions. We have a situation where toxic processes, properties, and products are baked into the infrastructure of our economy. Expediency and profiteering without consideration in some cases and with reckless disregard in others result in the use of cheap products, whether it's building materials and product components or fossil fuels. These actions result in contamination of our air, our water, our land, our buildings, and even our household products. And this affects all of us, but it impacts low-income communities and communities of color disproportionately. And the root causes of this disproportionate exposure is the history of exploitation, oppression, and systematic displacement of democracy, which makes certain communities more likely to be exposed to these processes, properties, and products that are responsible for too many of the social ills in our communities. A child like Antoine in Indiantown, Florida, who with his classmates is exposed to lead and other toxins coming out of the smokestacks of the coal-fired power plant in their community every day. This means that whether they aren't in school due to exacerbation of asthma on poor air quality days, or they are in school but having a hard time paying attention because of the tie between lead exposure and attention deficit disorder. And on top of this, on average, property values are lower when you're living next to a toxic facility. Antoine and his classmates have a lower chance of educational attainment, which means that they are less likely to be on grade level by the third grade, which, according to many studies, increases the likelihood that a child will enter into the school-to-prison pipeline. A child like Destiny in East Chicago, Indiana, whose lead levels were 30 times the allowable limit, and whose family, like 1,100 families, was ordered to move from the only home they've ever known within 90 days. Yet they don't have any place nearby due to the lack of Section 8 housing in Indiana. So the only community they've ever known is literally being torn asunder due to the combination of historic contamination and the lack of affordable housing. We have a child like Dante in Flint, Michigan, who is not only poisoned by lead, but who also lives in a food-insecure community where he's more likely to get a Cheeto or a Dorito than kale or quinoa, which means that the lead that was absorbed into his system was unfettered, as it won't be mitigated by the good nutrition, which is the only known mitigation against absorption of lead in our systems. Flint continues to be listed in the list of America's most dangerous places. Besides some studies that show that exposure to some toxins actually is linked to violence, as Leona Wynn noted, the old adage applies in too many of our cities that hurt people hurt people. These and so many other communities consumed by these tragedies illustrate for us all that systemic inequities demand systematic transformation. The crises and the discourse surrounding these crises has opened up a space and a dialogue about the comprehensive intersectional shift that must occur. There's a dawning recognition that we can't just tweak a system that is so deeply flawed that we have a nationwide pattern of poor communities and communities of color living in sacrifice zones where their lives are literally sacrificed for the excesses of society and through profit-driven decision-making. If it was as simple as tweaking our current systems, the fix would have been running clean water through the pipes in Flint, Michigan, or Baltimore, Maryland, or Jackson, Mississippi, or the other numerous places where children are drinking poisoned water or otherwise living in contaminated environments. But once again, literally and figuratively, you can't put clean water in a dirty system and expect everything to be okay. It's like the biblical reference of putting new wine in old wine skins. It's not enough. We need new wine skins. So what are we going to do about it? We've already discussed some of what we need to do. We know we have to address the underpinning dynamics that lead to these injustices. We must restore democracy. In the words of Queen Zakiya Shabazz this morning, orange must become the new black. We must ensure that our votes matter and that our votes count. We need to continue to struggle for voting rights. In doing so, we must transform the decision-making places from the courtrooms to the zoning boards to the hearing rooms to the public utilities commissions to the halls of Congress to the auditoriums of the United Nations, from places where people are acting at the behest of corporate interests to places where they truly represent the needs of the people, the nations, and the planet that they should serve. Starting right here in the U.S. with getting money out of politics and getting money out of the courts through campaign finance reform and through Citizens United. We can't can't just stop short at making things better for people in poverty. We must eliminate poverty. We can't just stop short at addressing hate crimes that are a symptom of larger problems. We must eliminate racism and other forms of discrimination in our society. And in the meantime, we have to address these systemic inequities that are disproportionately impacting these communities. We have to have stronger policies and stronger regulations. We have to have stronger standards, monitoring, and enforcement. And as Mayor Karen Weaver has modeled, we must ensure that we have local hire provisions and disadvantaged business enterprise provisions so that as we rebuild and retool our communities and our systems, it is we who are rebuilding and retooling our communities and systems. We have to build a better economy even in the absence of a positive policy landscape. The groups like the Cancer Free Economy Network and others are pushing for developing toxin-free products, ensuring safe and affordable housing for all, eliminating fossil fuel-based energy production. And we have to make sure that we're building an inclusive pipeline to do this in terms of doing things like making sure that we're teaching environmental justice in our classrooms, making sure that we're getting kids, and especially from impacted communities, involved in the STEM sciences, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And when all else fails, like the Sioux Nation, we must resist. We must demonstrate self-determination through activism. As Standing Rock Sioux has demonstrated, when you put out the call and you organize, people will come, link arms, and achieve victory. All in all, as Tom Goldtooth of the Indigenous Environmental Network said, we are all in the same river. We can and we must do this together. And as the African proverb says, when spiders unite, they can tie up a lion. So thank you.